Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast, coming to you at the end of, I was going to say enjoyable, but I'm sure for 16, well, maybe slightly less than 16. I'm sure some people would have been happy, but not always the most enjoyable whenever your team loses. But again, depending on the situation, the circumstances, how well you felt, maybe you're feeling somewhat positive after you lost, or maybe you're feeling negative after you won. So I would say I enjoyed it to an extent, but yes, it was good to be back in the NFL groove after it was a very interesting. Let's just call it that, an interesting week one in the National Football League. We will be getting into all of that in our usual roundup towards the end of the podcast. But first, I need to do what is traditional at the start of the show. And thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget that if you are new, you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. Don't forget to like and subscribe or follow whatever it is that you need to do on our social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. So feel free to give us whatever it is that you need to do on there. And if you are a returning listener, then as always, thank you very much for your continued support in this endeavor. Right, and with that, let us get on with the show. Now, if you are new, and this is your first time listening to this, I don't always go right into the big games of the week. I always like to start with off the field topics, as I like to call them, and then we sort of dive into unless there's a big controversial moment that's happened. But I usually start off the field, and then we get into the games towards the end in our roundup segment. But I want to start with something that is sort of both on the field and off the field at the same time. And it concerns NFL Red Zone. Now, this is something I could have talked about last week, but there were still some details that needed to be ironed out. But now we know what the situation is. For those of you who are unaware, but I'm sure you are, but just in case, NFL Red Zone is a way for you to watch every game, not necessarily every game at the same time, but all the games that are on at the same time, they cut to the big moments, they cut to the touchdowns. Effectively, whenever a team is attacking in the red zone, the 20-yard line and in, they will cut to that game so you can so you can see them score or try to score or whatever. That is the concept, and it's been seen as this game changing thing. And again, if you know the tagline, 7 hours of commercial free football, it's a great way to again keep track of all the games at the same time from the comfort of your own sofa. However, it went into some controversy because of the rules of ESPN and the NFL Network merging or buying a stake in each other. I can't remember exactly how it works, but it is the powers that be have decided that Red Zone will feature commercials or adverts for the first time, which again always went against the phrase of 7 hours of commercial free football. It was a way to to sit down and watch all the games that have to be interrupted by adverts. But now there is adverts, and again, no one was really quite sure exactly how it would work. They teased something towards the end of last season. What we're going to do this year? Are they going to properly cut away from commercials the way that they're doing it? It fills a screen, or are they going to have it, in a corner, or are they going to go, side by side, picture in picture to get the adverts? No one was quite sure, but we knew what it was after this week. So now I feel we can sort of add more details to it. However, my view on Red Zone, I said this on my personal social media, I'm not quite over the fuss of Red Zone as a whole. By the way, we only got out of the 7 hours, there was a total of 1 minute of commercials. So not really a big deal. Even if it was take away the whole screen, so the whole screen is taken up by Burger King or whatever company, Verizon. I'm only saying that because there's a Verizon van outside my house right now. Whatever company wanted to advertise, take up the full screen. It was, if it had gone that way, no one really, I don't think anyone really would have complained. But my thing about Red Zone is I get the idea for it, but I don't get the complaints from people who were saying, this is going to be the downfall of everything, because as a whole, I don't know what the viewerships are, but surely if you're watching Red Zone, how are you paying attention to your own team? And even then, surely you'd want to watch a whole game. Now, this isn't me like knocking Red Zone the product, far from it. This is me just sort of saying I still don't get the fuss and the anger over it, because I'm a Steelers fan. We play, a lot of our games are at 1 o'clock Eastern. During the 1 o'clock Eastern window, where the majority of the red zone games are, I'm watching the Steelers. I'm not watching red zone. Yeah, they show the touchdowns that come in from other games. So I'm seeing the touchdowns elsewhere. And, you see the scores, they flash across the top or the bottom of the screen. So you're not really missing out on anything. And then for the 4 o'clock window, surely you're watching another game as well. I did that. I did this week. I flicked between, the Seahawks 49ers and the Packers Lions. Two great games. You're not going towards red zone. So red zone, I think, does serve a great purpose. I think it's great for people who are getting into football. Back in the UK, whenever whenever Sky Sports, they still have the coverage, but there was always the one main game a week. That was all they could. That was all they could get. There was the one main game a week, and then there was Red Zone on another channel. Now on Sky Sports One, or main event as it changed to, they had the game. Whatever game they decide to have as the main game. Patriots, during their heyday, Patriots versus Seahawks, whatever, just for the sake of argument. And then on the other channel, they would have Red Zone. So if you are not a Patriots or Seahawks fan, then yes, I could understand going to watch Red Zone in that situation because you're not in the market and you want to be. That was the only way you could watch, unless you paid the like $150 a year for Game Pass and then you could watch all the games. But I was for the most of the time student slash unemployed, couldn't really afford to pay for that. So I would in that situation I would watch Red Zone. But if you are in the situation, and again, it's great to grow the game. I know so many people that got into it by watching Red Zone because it's all the action. You don't have the middling, teams struggling to get over the 40-yard line, four successive 3-and-outs, say. You don't get that. You get nothing but touchdowns and great plays. So it's great to get people into the game. But once you are into the game, and once you have, again, especially if you live in the city where your team is, if you live in the local market, then surely you are going to be wanting to watch that game. Even in the UK, yes, you can watch Red Zone to get into the game, but once you've established, okay, I'm going to be a Raiders fan, I'm going to be a Buccaneers fan, I'm going to be a Jaguars fan, I'm going to be whoever. If that game is chosen, you are going to watch that game. And then again, depending on if you can afford it, you will buy Game Pass so you can watch only that game. Maybe you want to have, you want to have Red Zone on your laptop and then your team on the big screen or vice versa. But I still don't get the again, I'm not. This isn't me disparaging Red Zone. It is a great product, but as I said, I'm not going to get angry over something like this that, in theory, should only be seen by the minority of football fans, when the vast majority will be watching a full game. So that's just my take on it. Again, Red after this weekend, I think everyone's going to know all the anger and fury of, Scott Hansen, the host of it, had to say, 7 hours of red zone football rather than 7 hours of commercial free football start right now. All that hype and fury, I think, is going to go away. So now we know exactly what the product is. But again, just in general, ramp it up to 2 minutes. I don't care because I'm not going to watch it. And I think, a lot of football fans aren't going to watch it as well because, again, they should be, in theory, focusing on their teams and their games. So let's just see how that works out. But again, I think there was a lot of fuss about nothing, and I think in the end, I think everyone will agree that it will run into and end up being a lot of fuss about a lot of nothing. Now, the second bit of news is going to strike somewhat personally to me, just obviously because of the profession that I'm in and the profession that I've worked towards during my college years, and it's the argument between Peter Schrager and Ryan Clark. Now, for those of you who perhaps didn't see it, depending on which NFL media outlet you decide to get your news from, and depending on which shows you like to watch, you may have seen it, you may not, but there was a little bit of an argument on ESPN's Get Up last week, where they were discussing the Dallas Cowboys' loss to the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 1, and they were talking about C.D. Lamb and his performance, down the stretch, and the fact that he had three big drops in the game. Peter Schrager, usual panel show sort of thing, but Peter Schrager was bringing up a point, and then Ryan Clark, former NFL player, takes issue with what he was saying. Nothing quite out of the ordinary there. People will disagree. But Ryan Clark brings up the point, and no, this is the quote. The thing is, though, and we shouldn't do this on TV, so I apologize if people think this is rude. This is the non-player in you. Okay. So basically, Ryan Clark is saying that there is, maybe perhaps hinting, this is my interpretation of it. You can feel free to interpret it any way you desire. But this is Ryan Clark effectively saying that there are certain things that, should be discussed about from certain people. Journalists stick to your lane and ex-players stick to their lane. Now, I really like Ryan Clark. I think in terms of what he brings in terms of energy, his knowledge, his passion, I think he's been brilliant. In terms of recent players of the past, people who have played in the past 10, 15, 20 years, who have made that transition from the media, from playing to the media. I think he's one of the best. I think he's got it. There are some players who struggle. I think some people have complained about Tom Brady and the way he presents himself when he's doing his commentary. Some people say they're not really made out for it. Some people in media say they're not, they don't get. Ryan Clark gets it. As a studio out, he gets it. I really like him. Do I agree with him? To an extent, I do. I don't agree with the way he did it. And again, this isn't something that should be done live on air. I don't agree with the way he handled it, but in theory, I do sort of agree with the point he is making. The way he made it, you can argue that I don't agree with, but the point he's making, I do agree with. I think there are some things that should be left to the players to discuss. And there are some things that should be left to the journalists and the insiders to discuss, which Peter Schrager is. When it comes to play on the field, like the player mentality and everything, I think, how is CD Lamb reacting to that job? How difficult really is it to make that sort of catch, when he's facing man coverage or whatever, stuff that only really, and again, like Ryan Clark, would have played safety, would have had to deal with players, having to catch against him in those situations. That sort of stuff should be left to the players. Again, the mental aspect of it, because there does come a sort of thing of, how does a player react to it? You can only really know that from being in that moment. And there are certain things that the journalists offer and insiders offer that some players don't. Ryan Clark may be well connected within the league, but how many contacts does Ryan Clark realistically have with the Los Angeles Chargers? Say, I'm just speculating, just throwing out teams here. How many contacts does he have with the Los Angeles Chargers and the New Orleans Saints and the Arizona Cardinals and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to get inside information on how the team is playing? How many contacts does he have within the Dallas Cowboys to say, right, what was the reaction to CD Lamb's, drops? What do the players, what do his current Cowboys think about it? Did they all rally around him? That is the sort of information that I think Peter Schrager could offer in that discussion. So this isn't for me to say, he shouldn't be on that panel or on that set at that time. Absolutely, he should be. But I think there are certain things that people offer in different scenarios. I think that's good. I think we don't want to just hear players. I think we do want to hear the journalistic angles of things. So what Ryan Clark was saying, again, in that situation, he may have been right. The way he went about it certainly was not. But I really hope this doesn't, you saw a couple of people referencing it over the weekend. I think it was Kyle Brandt I can't remember. I just saw the clip. I can't remember what network he was saying. And he pointed out, to all you non-players out there, we salute you. We thank you for your efforts and what you bring to the table, and so on and so forth. Obviously, Carl Brown and Peter Schrager used to be together on Good Morning Football on the NFL Network before Schrager moved over to ESPN. And I think Trey Wingo made a point on Twitter as well, just again talking about the non-players. We have a role. We have a role too. So again, hopefully this is something a bit like Red Zone, doesn't spiral into something big. I am seeing reports and suggestions on online today that there are some people who now don't want to work with Ryan Clark because of how he operates, and this is just the latest example of it. I really hope it doesn't come to that because again, I really do like Ryan Clark as an analyst, but again, I just hope this sort of dwindles into nothing, mainly because I don't want to see Ryan Clark lose his job because I think he does a fabulous job at it. So that's my thought. Again, it's somewhat personal to me because I am on one side of this argument, but I want to at least try and give something of a fair and balanced take on exactly what's happening. So now we come to the third segment of the show where I do my roundup and I just basically go around the league. Now, there are some scores or some games I don't really want to talk about, maybe because it was, the result was obvious or there's no real big storyline coming out of it. And I think, especially in week one, I don't really want to go too far in one way or the other in regards to, a lot of people and a lot of networks and shows will talk about, overreaction Monday and not wanting to make a big deal out of things. So I'm not going to do that for every game or every single result. I do think it is week one. There are still, plenty of, things left to go, and you can't really gain a lot from week one. What was Mike Tomlin saying last week? Wins and losses in week one are more about how dialed in and how set up you are and how disciplined you are rather than anything scheme wise and how well everything. So I'm not going to buy too much into it, but I'm just going to talk about a couple of things. Where should we start? We'll start with the first one, and I'll start off with the first game of the season. And if I am the Dallas Cowboys, I'm probably slightly kicking myself because if you had Micah Parsons, how big of a difference would he have made to that score? I know. Would he have been able to make a decent stop somewhere or get a sack that would have got you something to get you, back within 4 points? That has got to be my big thing. Maybe the Eagles have slightly regressed. Maybe there's some champions hangover, whatever. But anyway, that's just a chance to steal a game on the Eagles. I think that's got to be pretty annoying. Again, the CD Lamb drops on another day. Maybe they go in your favor. So don't really buy into that too much. That they showed, maybe they are going in the right direction. But again, kicking yourselves, you could have got a game within the NFC East and got the if you didn't trade away Micah Parsons. So I think that's got to be kicking them. Speaking of games within the division, I've got to say that the Los Angeles Chargers, how big must that be for them? I know there are some people that are down on the Chiefs this year. And again, to be able to steal a game within the division is going to be absolutely huge. I still think the Chiefs are going to win the AFC West. But even so, if it no, when it comes down the stretch, this result is gonna, could prove very, very crucial to how the AFC West and indeed the whole AFC playoff picture plays out. So again, not gonna buy into it. Not gonna say this is the end of the Chiefs dynasty, but Chargers looking good. Chiefs, a few issues. When Rashee Rice comes out from his suspension, maybe he'll kick them up another gear. But huge result for the Chargers just in the immediate aftermath. I will touch on the Indianapolis Colts and their demolition of the Miami Dolphins. I said I'm quite down on the Miami Dolphins this year. I do think Mike McDaniel is in contention to be one of the first, if not the first, maybe head coach to lose his job. Just I think there's something about him that looks as if he's checked out. Tua Tagovailoa, as he reached the end of his cycle in Miami, are they going to maybe look somewhere else? Is Tyreek Hill on the way out? I just think there's a lot of dysfunction within the Miami Dolphins, and the Indianapolis Colts, fair play to them, took took full advantage of that. So again, not overreacting, but the first signs are there that there could be some issues. Steelers and Jets. Obviously, I'm going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers looking great offensively. A whole lot of for what was meant to be potentially one of our best, if you hear what Mike Thomas said, one of our best ever defenses to give up 32 points, especially to a quarterback that was in the building last year. So we should know what he's capable of. To do that was slightly embarrassing. And again, if it weren't for one, fumble on a special teams, that 7 points going the other way, who knows exactly where that goes. So very, very lucky for the Steelers to get away with it. A few problems. If the offense plays like that, fine. If the defense plays like that, we're going to have problems. But I will say, if I'm the Jets, you got to feel very confident about, again, if maybe, again, one game not going to dictate everything, but looking very, very good, at least offensively. Maybe Justin Fields is the franchise quarterback. Maybe he's just there for 2 or 3 years, but he's showing a lot of promise, and I think that's really all you can ask for at this stage. Moving on, we have the Commanders and the Giants, and questions already about whether or not the Giants should bench Russell Wilson. I said this was going to be a little bit of a cluster fire for the Giants with their decisions with Jackson Dahl, with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. All on their day could be starters in the NFL, depending on what team. So a major issue there, I would have to say, and they're gonna have a lot of problems figuring out what they're going to be doing at quarterback moving forward and how long of a leash they give Russell Wilson. 49ers and Seahawks. I have high hopes for the 49ers this year, but a lot of that was based on whether or not they would be able to stay healthy. We've already seen the issue with George Kittle. Whether or not that's going to be something big moving forward, I don't know, but you've got to feel incredible. Because on their day, if everyone's healthy, you could make the argument that it is one of the best rosters, at least in the NFC, maybe in the whole NFL, but it is certainly up there. And for them to be constantly barraged by injury issues just feels very, very unfortunate. So you got to feel for them on that part. So, but still a very good win again within the division to go and claim a win in the NFC West. You got to feel very good. Going on another in division win, the Packers over the Lions. I was high on the Lions. I feel good about the Packers, but I still thought the Lions were going to be that much better. Maybe I was a little bit over optimistic about the Lions. And again, within division, if that's going to be the way the division is set, the tone is set within division, Packers could very well run away with it. Lions in not necessarily dysfunction, but going through a lot of changes after losing the coordinators. You can see the effect that had on them. Then the Packers, again, with Micah Parsons, who is a game wrecker, who can win games for you single handedly, taking full advantage of that. So, good for them. And rounding off, we have obviously the big game in the NFL of the weekend, the Bills and the Ravens. I will admit, I was one of those people that fell asleep towards the end of the game. I can't remember exactly the point that I fell asleep at. I know it was in the fourth quarter. But what I will say again, if I'm the Ravens, I'm not seeing this as huge. Again, one Derrick Henry fumble, you win that game. Everything else was going pretty well. I think, you'd probably want a little bit more from your defense, but again, this is Josh Allen, the MVP, one of the best offensive talents in the NFL, not just quarterback, but with his legs as well. Maybe you got to scheme a little bit better for when you meet potentially in the playoffs. But again, even with that Derrick Henry fumble, take that out of it, you win that game and everything, you can at least brush some stuff under the carpet. So again, if I'm the Ravens, I'm not too concerned. Obviously, it is going to be huge for playoff seedings when it comes to head-to-head records, but not a total disaster to just lose that one game. And for the Bills again, a lot of stuff to be worked out. And again, if they meet again, are you going to get that lucky bounce with the Derrick Henry fumble? Is that you've got to be able to just tighten yourself up a bit. And again, you can't keep relying on Josh Allen to save you. There needs to be input from elsewhere, be it a better running back, be it more play from the tight ends or the wide. And on defense side of the ball, I don't think they can rely on Josh Allen every single time to bail them out. And they saw that on Sunday. They got away with it. But moving forward, what's going to happen if Josh Allen has a bad game? You're not going to be able to get away with that. And just before we go, as always, I like to end the show with a look at the lighter heart of the sports world. And for this one, I do take you to the world of football, soccer, whichever one you prefer to call it. And this one involves former player Peter Crouch. Now, Peter Crouch, for the American, I think most British people will know who Peter Crouch is because he's got fame beyond the football field. But Peter Crouch was a former player, and he had quite a unique body shape, shall we say. He was 6'7", I believe he was, but he wasn't 6'7" and muscular like you would expect, like defensive ends or offensive tackles or basketball players to have. He was 6'7", but very, very skinny, which made him quite unique appearances, shall we say, on the football field. So, but he's an ex-professional now. He's in his 40s, but he still likes to play himself as a bit of a fun character, and he took that to a different level this week. So at a local game, it's actually pretty local to where I used to live in the UK, Farnham Town. So when you're at football games, especially at lower league, they have mascots. They're not the mascots, in the big fluffy suits or whatever. Mascots is in little children who walk out with the teams. And usually, some clubs do it for free. Some clubs, you can do it as a sponsorship. They need as much money you get. So for £100, say, you get 3 tickets to the game and your kid gets to walk out with the team. It's a nice thing. However, you may be able to tell where I'm going with this. For some reason, as a punishment for losing his fantasy football league, he was made to be a mascot at Farnham Town and walk out with the Farnham Town players in full kit as well. So there's a beautiful video that comes out of it. Is the two teams are coming out the tunnel. Again, Farnham Town are players come out and they're flanked by, little kids, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And then right at the end comes this big 6'7" rake in a Farnham Town outfit, and it's Peter Crouch, and that was his punishment for losing, for losing his fantasy football. I just thought that was quite humorous, just to see, again, just to see someone of that size and that fame having to do something like that. So go look at the clip. It is quite jarring when you actually get to look at it. But that is the end of the show. I want to thank you very much, as always, for listening in. Don't forget to like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform it is that you're listening to this on, and you can always get to us on our social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and on Twitter we are at MRB Sports Media. So feel free to give us a like there. I will be back next week again with a little bit of luck. I don't know if you can hear this in the recording, but you may have heard my son just make a few squeaks or make a few cries in the background. So as always, I try to do this every week, but with him, you never know exactly what kind of fussy mood he's going to be in and if he's going to allow me to record. So again, hopefully we'll be back next week talking about week 2 and maybe looking forward to week 3 as well. But until then, take care, and as always, stay safe.